Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event, the OSEP Monthly Technical Assistance Call. I would like to introduce Angela Tanner-Dean, the Associate Division Director of the Office of Special Education Programs with the Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Division. Angela?
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to be kicking off our technical assistance call today. Greg was unable to join us, and I'm not as clever as Greg, so I have no stories or anecdotes to share today, and we have a jam-packed agenda, so I'm just going to keep it moving. But I'm glad that everyone is doing well, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, we are going to be focusing on the FFY 2019 SPP APR package. We'll talk a little bit about the reporting requirements and what is going to be expected and due on February 1st, 2021. And then we'll move into talking about the newly released, thank you for your patience, because I know folks have been waiting for it, the newly released FFY 2020 through 2025 SPP APR package. So we'll do some highlighting of the changes in that package and talk a little bit about what you can expect in the coming months. So next slide, please. I think I already said welcome. I guess the other thing that I'll mention is, as always, you can put your questions in the chat. We will do our best to be responsive as we go along. There'll be some time hopefully at the end, but if there's not, we always collect those questions and we can follow up with an email to the field if there are things that we didn't have time to get to. Before I turn it over, I did want, oh, sorry, next slide, please. Before I turn it over, I also wanted to just make sure that everyone is aware that the final documents for the FFY 2018 SPP APR are now posted and available on our website. So the link is provided in the slide deck. Again, thank you for your patience. I know that there was a great interest in those being available. And we also wanted to flag for you that we are in the final stages of preparing the FFY 2018 indicator analysis documents for Part B and Part C. You can look for information about those in the coming weeks. And typically Greg sends out an email to alert the field when those are available. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Wolfheimer, the Data Implementation Team Facilitator, who will go through some information about the FFY 2019 package. Jennifer, you're up.
Thank you, Angela. Next slide, please. So today we are going to talk about the FFY19 SPP APR package that's due on February 1, 2021. Next slide. The SPP APR reporting platform will open late December. There were several things that impacted the open date, including rollover activities that were delayed slightly due to converting final documents from the FFY18 close activities to D508 compliance. Also, the 618 data reporting timelines that fall into the pre-populated data for the indicators, that has pushed the timeline back. We are strongly encouraging states to report as much of their submission within the reporting platform as possible and to minimize the use of attachments going forward. To accommodate this change, the contractor will be adding an additional text field into the introduction, and states will be prompted to provide any supplemental information in this additional section for the introduction, as well as any additional information into each indicator as appropriate. Also, one last comment related to the reporting platform. There will continue to be no functionality to include rich text in the tool moving forward for this year, as well as continued reporting years. And please submit any questions or concerns related to the platform or the submission to PSC, and the PSC information is in the slide deck. Next slide, please. So for the FFY19 SPP APR, next slide, please. As I said, it'll be due February 1st, 2021. States did receive assessment waivers for Indicator 3. The package as of this week was released by both OSEP and PSC. So the package included the measurement table for FFY19, the memo and instructions, and then also the ICC form for Part C. PSC did send out a FFY19 template to assist states and entities with collecting the information for the SPP APR in preparation for the opening deadline date in December. The template mirrors the FFY19 measurement table, but just puts things into boxes. And one thing I will like to say related to the OSEP. OSEP is working on a streamlined template that we will get out in the coming weeks to help states report the B17 and C11. States will not be required to use this template, but OSEP strongly would encourage states to utilize it, as we hope it will reduce some of the reporting burden this year. The template will include all of the requirements consistent with the measurement table. And like I said, please look for it to come out in the coming weeks. Next slide. We recognize that COVID-19 likely will impact the states and entities FFY19 STP APR submission, and that the programs will likely have incomplete data, low data, or no data due to this impact. Generally, OSEP will expect states to report whatever data they have under each indicator, and if there are issues related to data collection and reporting, i.e. completeness or data quality due to the pandemic, states should describe these issues, as well as any actions taken to address the issues in the narrative under each indicator. Additionally, if states are experiencing slippage in the data or have drops in the level of compliance, you should also explain the reasons for this in the narrative under each indicator. These pieces are also put in the memo and the instructions for the FFY package. Also, As it relates to reporting on correction for previously identified non-compliance, if the state was unable to verify correction consistent with 0902 due to the impact of COVID-19, that information should also be captured within the state's narrative for the specific indicator. Information provided within the state's narrative will be considered in OSEP's analysis of the SPP APR data and any decisions OSEP makes regarding how the data will be used for purposes of determinations. As always, OSEP will be able to consider publicly available information in making annual determinations. We have precedent for doing this in the past, specifically with states due to hurricanes, and we will be considering the impact of the pandemic when making determinations for 2020. Next slide. So the next couple slides really are just general cross-cutting reminders as you prepare for the FFY19 submission. So reporting to the public, as always, under the introduction section in the template and the reporting platform, states must provide information on how and where the state reports to the public on performance of each LEA or EIS program in the state on the targets in the SPP APR. OSEP will begin reviewing states' websites prior to February 1 and may reach out if we are unable to locate the information. If your state is NA for 2 or more consecutive years, which would be noted in your determination letter, please don't forget to include the information regarding technical assistance and the actions taken as a result of this TA. Next slide, please. So targets for FFY19, states were asked to set 19 targets last year when you submitted the FFY18 SPP APR. However, there were a few states that may not have submitted those. If you did not, please submit them with this year. And we've been receiving many questions related to setting targets for the new package during FFY20 and 2025. Please don't submit those with the FFY19 package. We're only asking for targets up to FFY20. As far as the required actions, just a general reminder, if you have required actions in any of your indicators or introduction, please check the FFY18 SPP APR and adjust those required actions in your submission of your FFY19 SPP APR. Next slide. Regarding compliance indicators, as you'll see on the screen, this requirement has been in place for the last several years, but states sometimes forget to provide the explanation of when the data is less than 100%, but no findings were issued. So please put that in the narrative for those compliance indicators. Next slide, please. So in our analysis, OSEP looks to ensure that states have made clear to us that they have looked at updated data or subsequent data, and in that review of the updated or subsequent data, they found that no compliance or 100% compliance. The state must give actual method for verifying the regulatory requirements are being implemented. Please don't cut and paste the boilerplate 0902 language, but rather describe the exact process the state is taking to correct non-compliance. Okay. Next slide, please. And then also when calculating and reporting the actual target data for the SPP APR, the state must ensure that it only reflects the actual level of compliance prior to the opportunity to correct any non-compliance. Next slide, please. Regarding representativeness for C4, B8, and B14, please look at the instructions regarding representativeness of the response data. Reporting that the state sends its survey to all students or, all parents or all leavers, or reporting that the survey was sent to a representative sample doesn't actually meet the requirement. So you'll want to just note that you're actually meeting the representativeness of the demographics that the specific indicator is calling for. Now I'm going to turn it over to Christine Program.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next slide, please. So for this highlight reel portion of our hour together, I'm going to give my best effort at being crisp with my words so that we can leave a few minutes for questions at the end. However, if I'm not successful, please, as Angela mentioned initially, and Jennifer as well, please put the questions that you may have in the chat as they come to you, as they're top of mind for you. And we can always follow up with responses after the call if we run out of time. So my job this afternoon is to talk about the newly approved final FFY 20 through 25 SPP APR package. And the first submission under this new package is due February 2022. So we're going to start the discussion with changes to the measurement table and the SPP APR general instructions that affect both Part B and Part C, and then move into discussing the package specific changes. Next slide, please. So I'd like to start off talking about this slide with an acknowledgement that it breaks all of the PowerPoint 101 rules for font size, amount of content, etc. However, we do want these slides to serve as a resource for you after our calls, so I hope that you extend a little grace to us in that regard for breaking those rules. So the current language in the SPP APR general instructions requires a description of the mechanism for soliciting broad stakeholder input on the SPP APR targets. In the new package, we have included some must-haves for that description. So as noted in the 4 sub-bullets that you see on the screen, on the slide, for both Part B and Part C, the general instructions specify what this description must include. And I won't read those 4 to you, but that's the change that's on the general instructions, the SPP APR. Next slide, please, Jennifer. So the second area that we wanted to talk through with you today that crosses both the Part B and the Part C package is tied to the survey indicators, so indicators C4, B8, and B14. While there's some slightly nuanced differences within these indicators that we're going to cover a little bit later in the presentation, generally across these 3 indicators, states will be required to compare the response rate to the previous year and describe strategies to increase that response rate, analyze the response rate to identify potential non-response bias and take steps to reduce that bias and promote increased responses, and describe the metric used in describing representativeness. Finally, starting with the 2023 submission for Part B and the 2024 submission for Part C, states must include race and ethnicity in its analysis of representativeness. Next slide, please. For indicators C11 and B17, the OSEP With the 2022 submission, the entire SPP APR, so inclusive of C11 and B17, will be due on February 1st. So this is a change in the timeline that it is due. Also, we will be providing an optional streamlined template. States have reported that OSEP reporting is burdensome because there's no guidance on the amount of information that's required in the OSEP. And sort of over the years, as we've analyzed submissions, we've observed that reports range from, in some cases, less than 50 pages to, in other cases, more than 200. And that some reports, while voluminous, may not provide a concise, cohesive, easily understandable, and transparent report of a state's progress. So hopefully that optional streamlined template will support in that regard. Next slide, please. So we're going to move into the specific changes for each package, starting with Part C. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned a few moments ago, race ethnicity must be included in a state's analysis, starting with the 2024 submission for Part C. Remember, Part B has a different timeline. In addition, at least one other demographic category from the list provided also has to be included. And within that list, we wanted to draw your attention to the option to include a demographic category approved through your stakeholder input process. The inclusion of race ethnicity in this analysis is tied to OSEP's belief that in order to report high quality data, states must consider race ethnicity when analyzing the extent to which the demographics of the families responding are representative of infants, toddlers, and families enrolled in the Part C program. So that was the impetus for the revision to include race ethnicity in this list of demographic categories that must be considered. Next slide, please. Moving on to indicators 5 and 6, OSEP acknowledges that each state has its own eligibility criteria for determining if an infant or toddler with a disability is eligible to receive early intervention services in the natural environment. Recognize that comparing a state's data to the national average is not a meaningful comparison, so we are no longer going to be requiring that comparison. Next slide, please. Now moving into Part B, which has more revisions for us to talk about, but it looks like we're still pretty good on time. Next slide. Starting with indicator 1, the data source for this indicator has changed, starting with that 2022 submission, and will now be 618 exiting data. Next slide. The data source for indicator 2, dropout, has also changed and will be the 618 exiting data. Currently, states can report data under this indicator either using 618 exited data or using the same data source used in the 2010 APR. But beginning with the 2023 submission, the data source will be the 618 exiting data. So both indicators 1 and 2, data source will now be 618 exiting data. However, indicator 2 starts that requirement a year after in 2023. Next slide, please. The next few slides are going to talk about indicator 3, so all about assessment. Historically, when reporting on the participation rates of children with disabilities in the SPP APR submission, states were required to report inclusive of all ESEA grades assessed. So that's 3rd through 8th and high school for children with IEPs. So this indicator has been revised and to require states to report on participation rates for children with IEPs in grades 4, 8, and high school. And you'll see across all of these sub-indicators, so participation, proficiency rates on grade level, on alternate academic achievement standards, and the proficiency rate gaps, all of the reporting is 4th grade, 8th grade, and high school. So we believe that focusing on those 3 grade levels will provide a number of advantages. One, mitigating or preventing the masking of high performance or low performance, or improvement, no improvement, that would occur if all grades are combined to generate an average. Also, it focuses on the effectiveness of early elementary instruction, so thinking about those K-3 literacy programs. Also focusing on successful transition of students with disabilities from middle school to high school, and continues that focus on high school, which is a critical time for students with disabilities transitioning to adult life. Next slide, please. So indicator 3B, proficiency rate for children with IEPs. This is going to require states to report that proficiency rate against grade level academic achievement standards. 3C requires states, next slide, Jennifer, requires states to report that proficiency rate of children with IEPs against alternate academic achievement standards. And 3D has been added to require states to calculate a proficiency rate gap for children with IEPs in grades 4, 8, and high school who are assessed against grade level academic achievement standards. And for all of those assessment indicator 3 sub-indicators, those data will be pre-populated in the reporting platform. Indicator 4, next slide, please. So OSEP made some revisions for clarity and consistency in 4A and 4B. The indicator language and the measurement were revised to replace the term district with local educational agency. That was done to align with 612 of IDEA and make sure that there was a consistent term used across all aspects of the indicator. So thinking about the indicator, the data source, the measurement, and the instructions. We added the defined by state after each reference. And we also revised the instructions to define long-term suspensions and expulsions in a manner that's consistent with how the state's discipline data is collected under Section 618. And finally, we made a revision to include cell size in addition to N size, which would then be consistent with indicators 9 and 10 and certainly is responsive to state requests. Next slide. Indicator 5, states have repeatedly requested permission to report separately on the number of 5-year-olds in preschool and the number of 5-year-olds in kindergarten. And while the EdFacts file specs did not allow for this before, based on the EdFacts information collection package approved back in September of 2019, OSEP will require states to submit the count of 5-year-old children with disabilities receiving special education and related services in kindergarten with the data on school-age children with disabilities. This data will also be pre-populated in the APR to reduce burden on states. And this change was also, as I mentioned, made to be consistent with that new EdFacts information collection package. Next slide, please. Indicator 6. The revisions made to this indicator include requiring disaggregated reporting by discrete age, adding category C to require reporting on preschool children with disabilities who receive special ed and related services in the home, and to allow states to report under this indicator only the 5-year-olds who are enrolled in a preschool program. We believe that adding the category home aligns with the SPP APR EdFacts data collection and provides transparency. We discussed a little while ago that EdFacts information collection package and the corresponding changes to align with that in indicator 5. And states currently report by preschool ed environments using discrete age and special ed and related services in the home. So all of this was an effort for further alignment. Next slide. Indicator 8, parent involvement. As noted in our discussion of C4 and earlier when we were looking at cross-cutting issues, race and ethnicity must be included in a state's analysis starting with the 2023 submission. And there's also the requirement that there is another demographic category added from the list that is noted here. as was similar to C4, states may choose a category approved through a stakeholder input process. Next slide. Indicator 13. We're almost there, guys. This indicator was revised to clarify that there must be evidence that, if appropriate, a representative of any participating agency that's likely to be providing or paying for transition services, including, if appropriate, pre-employment transition services, was invited to the IEP team meeting. And finally, indicator 14. In terms of the revisions that were made to this indicator, we're going to continue to provide flexibility on the definition used for competitive employment. In the current package, states had 2 options to report that data, and we will continue, that will be continued in the new package. States will be required to report the total number of children in the census or sample. And as was the case in 8, indicator B8 and C4, the analysis of representativeness must include race and ethnicity beginning with the 2023 submission, and at least 1 additional demographic category from the list provided, which could also include a category that was approved through your stakeholder input process. And next slide, that comes, we've reached the end and we have plenty of time for questions. Jennifer, I don't know if you'd like to open it up to see if anyone has any questions for us.
There are quite a few in the questions pod if you want, if you wanted to look in there.
Yes, can you give us a few minutes, Jennifer, to look and see? I'm sorry, all. We are all obviously not together, working virtually, and my 2 colleagues had trouble getting on GoToWebinar. They couldn't see the slides. They can't see the chat, only I can. So give me a few minutes to look, and then we can start answering these questions. Thanks, Jennifer.
Not a problem. And I have answered a couple of them. Just so everyone knows, the archive of this event will be posted on the OSEP Ideas That Work website. It will be under the program areas in the MSIP page for national TA calls. We'll have the link to the recording for the event, as well as the PowerPoint slides from today. You can also find other archived calls and information as well, and you'll be able to register for the second call that's coming up this month.
Awesome, thanks, Jennifer. Okay, I pulled up the questions and I will start answering them. To my colleagues who can't see, if as I'm starting to answer, you are always free and empowered to jump in and either correct me if I'm wrong or validate what I'm saying or add additional information. So the first question we got pretty early on that I did not see was asking us to repeat the opening date for the SPP APR for 2019. Jennifer, you want me to go ahead and answer that? I know that you covered it in your section.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, so you want me to answer it? It's good. We said late December. Right now, we're on target for, I think that could be around the 3rd week in December-ish. We are hopeful that we can shave days off of that, but right now it's the latter part of December. Second question is around attachments being graphics, and will states be able to include those in the body of the document, or will they still have to be attachments?
Do you want me to take that?
Sure.
So for attachments, it's critical that any attachment that is put into the system be made 508 compliant. The actual platform itself does not allow for rich text, so it will not, graphs will not be permitted. But if a state or entity feels that a attachment is extremely necessary, it just must be 508 compliant. But we would encourage you to find a way to put the information into the platform.
Thanks, Jennifer. The next question is around updates on whether the platform could support markdown syntax or another alternative to rich text. Yes, to the asker of the question, we have heard the question a number of times, so it has been relayed to us each time you have asked. We're compiling a list of these sort of ideas and alternatives to rich text for our contractor to see what we may be able to institute moving forward. So it has been recorded, it's added to the list of potential options, and we still have to work with our contractor to see what's possible. Right now, their focus is on rolling over the system. So after that, we can talk about what could possibly happen in years to come. I think I will say, and I think we've articulated it in different venues before, security is of paramount importance, and that's the issue with the rich text, what can be introduced within the agency-wide system. So that's an important consideration. There's another question about attachments, the ability to input data tables. I think Jennifer has addressed that in terms of no, it would have to be an attachment. Nothing can be, we can't have data tables within the platform. A question about the open date again, we covered that. There was a clarifying question around what was meant by indicator 3 state assessment waivers on slide 8. The Secretary invited states to apply for waivers for the statewide administration of assessments and certain accountability provisions of ESEA back when the pandemic hit, and all states requested waivers to administer those assessments. So when the system opens up in December and with your 2021 submission, no states have statewide assessment data that's being reported. I hope that that clarifies it. Brenda, if it doesn't, just drop something else in the chat and I'll see it when I keep scrolling down. Question around if B3 again, if a submission is not needed. No data will be pre-populated in B3, but you're still going to have to submit that indicator. Jennifer and Angela can correct
me.
Hi,
this is Angela. Yeah, I'm sure that they're going to have to still click the
yes.
button
you have to click
to submit,
yes.
but
yes.
there's no data or information that is required or that we will be analyzing for that indicator.
Correct. Latter part of that question is tied to not needing to submit FFY 20 through 25 targets. You would not do that until the 2022 submission. And in terms of stakeholder involvement for B3, I'm assuming you're talking about the 21 submission. Obviously, that would not have to be included because there's nothing noted for the indicator. However, many states under the introduction, what they include in terms of stakeholder input, many states check the box, so that's pre-populated in all of the applicable indicators. So that could appear under your indicator 3B or 3C, but certainly there's no data that you're reporting under those indicators. So you just have to hit the submit button or whatever button it is to submit it. And I say whatever button you have to submit because we see something slightly different. Asking for clarification on if targets have to be submitted for FFY 20. No, targets do not need to be submitted for FFY 20 until your 2022 submission. Okay, just so you guys know, I'm going in order of when these questions came in, so it looks like if people are then responding saying, oh, don't worry, etc. So if I answer something and you'd said, don't worry, pardon that confusion, but I'm going in order. We answered the question about targets, about indicator 3. When will OSEP's responses to comments be posted in regulations.gov? They should be there as we speak. We got that cleared up earlier this morning. and they're there now. Jennifer, anything else you want to add about that?
I would just say to go into regulations.gov again. Everything should be there as of, I think, 10 a.m. this morning. So, yeah.
Thank you. Question about the slide with the general instructions and the changes that were made to that language, and if we could provide detail on which of those bullets apply to indicators 1 through 16 versus the OSEP. And going back to that slide, that language applies to the entire SPP APR. So if you read the STEM, it talks about the other indicators, but also includes the OSEP. But Mary, if you have additional follow-up with that, or you want to raise that on our SEDMAG call later this month, or if it's next month, all my days are running together, we can definitely add that on the agenda and talk through any additional questions you have there. A question about how the decision was made to include the OSEP with the February 1 due date. We speak at length about that in the document that we got a question about if it was posted in regulations.gov yet in the response to the 30-day comments. So I'll go through all the questions first. If we have time at the end and we can go back and discuss that fully, we can, but just know that our rationale for that is in that document that is now currently on regulations.gov.
Christine, this is Angela.
Sure, you can go ahead if you could do it in quick fashion while I am, be crisp with your words now while I'm going through these questions.
Yes, I just wanted to go back to the question about stakeholder engagement, and that was asked previously. We haven't talked about the fact that we will be working on some universal technical assistance and guidance that will provide some more content information around some of those cross-cutting pieces. So the stakeholder engagement, the target setting, representativeness, and hopefully toward the end of November, early December, that will be available to states. So we are going to be working on those general cross-cutting areas first in terms of what we push out, and then that obviously will be followed by some indicator specific guidance.
Thanks, Angela. Seth, I commit to, we're going to circle back on all of your platform related questions in terms of ideas for how to make it better, because we do collect every idea you send us and then share it with our contractors' possibilities. So just know that while I'm not addressing it here, that it will be attended to. Question around the why with the race ethnicity requirement, why we made that change. There's a need to express that a little bit more clearly on our end to help guide states' work as they engage in this critical equity work. I mean, in short fashion, we really believe that in order to report high quality data, we believe that states have to consider race and ethnicity when analyzing the extent to which the demographics are representative. I think once again, I'll point you to that response to the 30-day comments and those documents that are posted on regulations.gov, but we can circle back to some of these if you need some more information in terms of response. Information on getting a waiver. The waivers that states received to not administer statewide assessments. And if you're questioning where that came from, as I mentioned, it came out from the department to all states, and all states submitted requests for waivers. There wasn't a state who didn't do it. For our outlying areas, freely associated states, insular areas group, in many cases, because of the way that their consolidated grants are structured, depending on how they consolidated title funds and for what activities would have determined if they needed to request a waiver or not. They would have worked through our insular areas group in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education for that. But to my knowledge, and the last time I checked, there is no one that has administered a statewide assessment. So therefore, we shouldn't have data from anyone. But to the person who wrote in that question, you can feel free to follow up with us if you have any additional concerns.
This is Angela.
Go for it.
I'm not, because I can't see the chat. I don't know if it was included in the question, but the waivers that we are speaking of were specific to the assessments that were would have been administered during the spring. Correct?
Yes.
Not for future assessments.
Correct. That would have been the statewide assessments that would have been administered for the 1920 school year.
Correct. And there is no current opportunity to request waivers for the upcoming administration of statewide assessments, which would occur for the 2021 school year.
That is correct. And I believe that the secretary has made that quite clear. Questions around timeline stuff will be posted. It's a question about if there's going to need to be a description of how COVID impacted indicator 3 by not having data, or if it's understood because waivers were granted. It's understood that waivers were granted, so you wouldn't have to speak to that under that specific indicator, but any other indicator, you would have to speak to the areas that Jennifer noted earlier in terms of how COVID-19 impacted your data collection and reporting. There was a comment about something confusing on the PowerPoint under indicator 4. We'll go back and take a look at that and make an edit if required and send it back to Jennifer so she can make sure that it's posted. Or do we post it somewhere? I'm confused about where it gets posted, but we'll make sure it's posted with the correct information if that edit needs to be made for the person who pointed that out. Clarification around the OSEP due date. So for 2021, for the 2021 submission, the OSEP is due on April the 1st, 2021. However, with the 2022 submission, that due date will become February 1, consistent with the other indicators in the APR. We're not going to get to all of these. So, and some of them are a little weedy and we'll have to investigate and get back to folks, but we will make sure that we do that and follow up with responses to you. There's a question about the second OSEP TA call this month, which will be next week. Angela, do you want to share a little bit about what that's about so I can keep scrolling through the questions?
Sure.
Excuse
me. Sorry. The next DMS call, the next national TA call that we will be having this month will be on DMS 2.0. So the differentiated monitoring and support work that is currently being implemented. I believe the team is going to be reviewing the fiscal monitoring protocols that have been developed and are currently posted on our website to talk through provide an overview of those documents and how they will be used with the states currently in cohort 1 and how other states might consider using those protocols and those tools as they look at their own systems. But if Matt or Kate are also on the call and want to say anything additional, oh, they can't because they're not presenters. Sorry.
They can put it in the chat though. They can put it in the chat.
I think I captured the key points though.
Scrolling through some of these, there were a number of questions about clarification on when the ESEP was due. I hope that I wasn't the one that caused that confusion. When I mentioned February 1, remember at that point in time, we were talking about the 2022 submission. So once again, ESEP is due April 1 of 2021. And then based on the requirements in the new package, the ESEP will be due on February 1, 2022, following year. Question about what will be required for stakeholder input this year. With your 2021 submission, you will be meeting the same requirements that have been in effect for the current package. The language that was highlighted on the slide when we were talking about the FFY20 package, which is the new package, which would dictate your 2022 submission is 1 year out. So if you're thinking about your 21 submission, I'm sure you've done quite a bit of stakeholder engagement around that submission already, but the requirements for that would be consistent with the current package. Oh, you guys are asking some really good data questions that we're going to have to follow up with in writing. Things around how to, if you discover an error after submission, things around targets. I will also take the opportunity as I'm scrolling and recognizing we only have 5 minutes, is that we have been engaged with our TA centers around how we can best support states and coordinate that support to states with the new package that will start with your 2022 submission. So I know a number of the questions that I've seen come in, I am sure folks at our friends at IDC and DAISY would be interested in, that I can see some that our friends at ECTN and CSI would be interested in, and as we think about how to support you as you prepare for that 2022 submission. Oh, so some of you have already left the call, but now I'm getting to the end of the questions. People are saying that some of the confusion about indicator 3 was around making sure it was clear that when we talk about statewide assessment waivers, that we were talking about B3. So statewide assessments that are used for accountability purposes, and we were not talking about indicator C3 and any assessments tied to outcomes. So if that was not clear, we apologize. There's a good question about if the ability to describe how COVID affected our data be allowed for the February 2022 submission as well. I think we recognize that none of us are able to see how long COVID is going to continue to affect data, but we recognize it will likely be past the 2021 submission. So we would continue to put out guidance about what we would expect in 2022 as time moves on, but certainly I cannot envision a time that we would not be asking states to write to the impact of this pandemic on their data. Angela, Matt said you got it right. Yay, you. And then there was a request to share questions with centers, which I think we mentioned. I think there are a number of them that our centers would be very interested in receiving. So with 3 minutes left, I'll say if we did not specifically answer your question, we will work with Jennifer, compile answers and get those back out to folks, because I believe there have been other calls where we've done that before, where we've responded after the call. And I don't know if my colleagues have anything else to say in closing. Angela, you're always good at closing us out with something, you know, warm and heartfelt and lifting your spirit. So
I am chuckling at that right. I'm chuckling at that right now. It's a beautiful day here on the East Coast. I hope the weather is nice for all of you around the nation. Yeah, I have nothing clever to close us out with.
We'll have to
hope
tell
that
Greg.
everyone, we hope everyone stays safe. Please keep those questions coming because although sometimes they make us sweat, they also help us think and help us make sure that we are providing guidance and support to you that is meaningful and relevant. So please keep those questions coming. You can either submit them through PSC. That's probably the best way because they help us track those questions and ensure that we follow up with responses. But, you know, you can also talk to your state leads, talk to our TA partners, and we will do our best to be responsive.
See, Angela, even with like a pressure set, you did great. So I think with 1 minute left, Jennifer, I don't know if there's anything else. I think I saw everything that's in the chat, and I'm hoping that you can send that to us separately so that we can work on responding to any of those particularly weedy data questions that we have to get back to folks on.
I definitely will. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And just as a reminder, the archive of this event will be posted on the OSEP Ideas That Work website under the program area pages on the MSIP page for the technical assistant calls. Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.